And clearly there is a domain of facts about which we can form true or false beliefs, which relate to the most important questions in human life, questions relating to how human beings can flourish, individually and collectively. And there's a continuum of possible experience with really the worst possible failures of civilization on the one end, and everything that's better on the other. So you have a place like Congo now, where people's daily concern is avoiding being raped and killed by drug-addled soldiers. And then it's clearly possible to move from a failed state of that kind to something much more idyllic, toward a kind of civil society in which a gathering like this is even possible. Clearly there are right and wrong ways to move. There's not an infinitely many ways to be right about how to get out of a failed state. There are behaviors that incline people to trust one another. There are behaviors and social arrangements that allow strangers to cooperate, where you can have an economy that is predicated on the rule of law. And there are ways to completely blow that circumstance and to wind up in a situation where no one trusts anyone. Clearly there's something to be known about how human beings can do that. And there are many levels at which we can know it. There's a level of the genome and neurobiology. We're just talking about the details of what is happening in the brains of everyone involved. And there's the level of social systems and political arrangements and economic understanding. And everything that can possibly influence states of the human brain and human behavior falls potentially in the purview of our moral concern. But all of these domains, I mean, here we're talking about genetics and neurobiology and psychology and sociology and economics. All of these domains are domains of right and wrong answers. And they're domains that potentially fall within the purview of science. Now, it's pretty easy to see, I think, that there are right and wrong answers when you just imagine two people living on Earth. Just imagine two people in a moral solitude. We can call them Adam and Eve. And ask yourself, are there right and wrong ways for these two people to try to thrive? Well, clearly there are. I mean, wrong way number one, they can smash each other in the face with a large rock. Okay, there are clearly ways for two people to collaborate and to fail to collaborate. Now, how does this circumstance change when you add 6.7 billion more people to the experiment? I don't think it does. I think it just grows more complicated. So what I'm asking you to envision is a space of possible experience, which I call a moral landscape, where the peaks correspond to the heights of well-being and the valleys correspond to the lowest depths of suffering. Okay, and there's many things that fall out of this analogy. One is, clearly there can be many peaks. I think it's quite reasonable to expect that there are many different ways that individuals or groups could thrive, different and actually incompatible ways, but equivalent with respect to everything that's worth caring about in terms of what maximizes the well-being of everyone involved. Now, why isn't this a problem? Why isn't the existence of many peaks just a relativistic and therefore nihilistic circumstance? Well, there are clearly many more ways to not be on a peak. I mean, there are many wrong answers to the question of how to thrive in this universe. And wherever you happen to be on this landscape, there are going to be right ways to move up as opposed to moving down. There are going to be ways that you can be mistaken about whether you're moving up or down. And one analogy I think that's useful to consider is to food. I would never argue that there must be one right food to eat. I mean, clearly there are many things that qualify as food. But the distinction between food and poison is still absolutely clear, even when it's not clear. I mean, even all the caveats. For instance, some people are allergic to peanuts, say. So for some people, peanuts are a poison, but they're a food for everyone else. Okay, this is something that can be understood in the context of biology and chemistry and all the relevant science. This doesn't make the distinction between food and poison something that we just make up by personal whim or something that's merely culturally contingent or now, many people also worry that for a moral principle to be true, it has to always be true. And if you can find one exception, well, then there's no such thing as moral truth. So, for instance, if lying is wrong, it always has to be wrong. Well, this is, consider a game like chess. A principle like don't lose your queen is obviously a very good principle to follow in chess. But it admits of nearly countless exceptions. There are moments where losing your queen is a brilliant thing to do. There are moments where it's the only thing you can do. And yet, a commitment to not losing your queen is one of the best things you can maintain in order to play winning chess. So there could very well be moral principles that are almost always good, in that they almost always allow us to collaborate with one another better than we otherwise would. They almost always allow people to avoid unnecessary suffering. And yet, they may admit of exceptions. You know, when the Nazis knock on the door and say, do you have any Jews in the basement? Okay, that might be the moment to consider lying. And this framework also admits of the possibility of the relevance of a contemplative life and the possibility of what's classically called spiritual or mystical experience. I happen to think there are states of well-being that very likely can be hard-won and may require a lot of training and a lot of talent, frankly, in order for a person to experience. I used to be in the habit of saying that undoubtedly there's a Tiger Woods of compassion out there somewhere. For obvious reasons, that analogy doesn't quite work. But I think compassion is increasingly best viewed as a skill. I mean, it's clearly trainable to some degree, and not everyone has the same talent for it. And basically everything in our inner life that is of interest to us is a kind of skill. I mean, being aware of your own emotions, being able to regulate your negative emotions, being aware of the emotions of others, these are talents that can be developed to a greater or lesser degree. It's clear that there are discoveries that any maturing science of the mind would grant us that would be relevant to our developing these talents to whatever degree we can. Now this, you can almost see this photo. This is, who among you actually recognizes this photo of happy Nazis? This is a photo of, it's now taken from a photo album that was totally unmarked. It was just photos of Nazis sort of cavorting in a kind of like a ski chalet. And they were playing accordion music and eating blueberries and lying in the sun and lounging about. And it took a while to figure out who these people were. It turns out this was the staff at Auschwitz during its absolute prime as a machine of death. I mean, this is more or less what the staff at Auschwitz were doing on their days off, a few kilometers from the plume of human ash coming out of the crematorium. Now, there's nothing, and you can, again, I'm sorry, you can sort of barely see it, but they look like they're genuinely having a good time. I mean, these aren't fake smiles. There's nothing about the link I'm drawing between morality and well-being, or my view of the moral landscape, that forces me to deny that these people could have been happy to some degree. Okay, the problem here is that their happiness is predicated on their drawing a boundary around their moral universe that's so tight as to put almost all of humanity outside of it. I mean, this is clearly not a peak on the moral landscape, and there are clearly pleasures that these people, for instance, compassion being one of them, that these people don't have full access to. But there's no reason to think that these were all psychopaths. I mean, most of the Nazis and most of the SS were undoubtedly normal people who loved their kids and their pets and would go home and listen to Wagner and shed a tear. I mean, these are neurologically intact people who had a worldview that radically delimited their moral concern. And that's the problem we continually run into. We're not always bumping into people who have completely different views of what is good and what is evil. We're always bumping into people who draw the boundary of their moral concern narrowly around a single group. So various forms of tribalism and racism and nationalism and religious ideology keep people from extending the circle of their moral concern to the rest of humanity. And the challenge for us is to find a framework in which we can talk about good in a truly global sense. Now, I want to talk about why religion is not that framework, and I want to focus specifically on Islam for a moment, because I think we are misled by the very concept of religion. We have this one word, religion, which is nearly useless. I mean, religion is a word like sports. There are sports like badminton, and there are sports like Thai boxing, and they basically have nothing in common apart from breathing. There are sports where you can expect to get injured. There are sports that are synonymous with violence. And if you get injured playing badminton, you're just embarrassed. Okay. Now, there really is a religion of peace in this world. Unfortunately, it's not Islam. Jainism is a religion of peace. Jainism is a religion of India that has something like 10 or 15 million subscribers at this point. It's where Gandhi got his nonviolent social protest. The core principle of Jainism is non-harming. Okay, the crazier you get as a Jain, the less we have to worry about you. This is just simply a fact. It is not an accident that there's no one lying awake at night worrying about the Jains. Okay, and so, again, notice the problem is not religious extremism. Okay, we use this word, we're worried about extremists. That's a euphemism. Extreme Jains harm nobody. Extreme Jains literally are paralyzed by their pacifism. I mean, these are people who cannot take their eyes off the ground when they walk, lest they step on an ant. Now, Islam, on the other hand, entails a very different commitment. And we have to talk honestly about this. Now, these people whose faces I put up here are representative of a very plausible version of Islam. And that's a problem. We have Mullah Omar on the left and Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who's generally credited with having masterminded September 11th. Whatever their differences are, politically or personally, they agree about the nature of reality and how to live within it. And I think they probably agree on those core issues more than any three people in this room. And it's not an accident that they converge so much because they are literally drawing their vision of life out of a book. And this book was believed